Welcome to this episode of our election road trip, our journey across France to explore voters' key concerns ahead of the upcoming presidential election. Today, we're headed to the very heart of rural France. So we've arrived in the small city of Guéret in Creuse, in the geographic heart of France, to discover what life looks like outside of France's big cities.
If I have a problem, I need to go to the pharmacy, but I don't have a car to get there. In the countryside, there's nothing. The baker doesn't even come by anymore.
It's not easy getting answers or support when you live in such an isolated place.
Our population is the oldest of any French department, of any region in Europe. In the early 2000s, we thought, why not harness that?
France has the largest surface area of any EU country, and millions of French voters live in the countryside. But all too often they find themselves grappling with things like high unemployment and underdeveloped infrastructure. A closer look now at France's urban-rural divide.
In 2020, almost 80% of French residents lived in cities, with almost half of all people based in cities with more than 100,000 residents. Everyone else, that's 20 to 30% of the population, lives in the countryside. Some 90 years ago, at the start of the 1930s, the majority of French people lived outside urban centres. But a post-war rural exodus from 1945 onwards shifted the balance in favour of cities. A mass departure repeated in the mid-70s. Although in more recent years, significant numbers have also been flocking to the suburbs and commuting to cities for work. Most service industries, including commerce, finance and transport, are concentrated where the customers and opportunities are, that's to say, cities. The care sector is one of the few still tied to more rural communities. That said, in rural areas, most household income is directly linked to local economic activity. But that obscures a worrying fact. The number of people employed in the agricultural sector, a cornerstone of France's rural economy, has dropped by 12% in 10 years.
In the wake of the pandemic, lots of French urbanites dream of moving to the countryside. A lack of public services ultimately puts many of them off, but not everyone.
There are more and more people, myself included, who've decided to make that leap. We're happy to live in more rural areas, in medium or small cities. It's more comfortable, we have a better quality of life. Everything I need, I have here. So just like we talk about the cost of living a lot, I think it's important that we talk about this too. And I think it's great that all the political candidates are taking it on.
In this election, I don't think we're talking enough about rural areas. All those decisions taken at the wider district level, well, they often are not what we need in the countryside. And that's especially true when it comes to public transport.
There are no buses to take us anywhere. There's nothing. My doctor doesn't do home visits. If I have a problem, I need to go to the pharmacy, but I don't have a car to get there. In the countryside, there's nothing. The baker doesn't even come by anymore.
The French department of La Creuse is the second least populated in France, with an average of just 22 inhabitants per square kilometre. We're meeting Eric Guéret, president of the wider Guéret district. He's been fighting for years to improve the living conditions of local residents and, by extension, to convince them to stay. Eric Guéret, what are the major challenges you face in this region?
There are a number of challenges. The first concerns demographics. We need to make sure we're keeping people here, that's key. We can't continue to cram people into big urban centres, making them unhappy. So that's the demographic challenge. There's also the question of economics. A business owner might decide it's easier to get set up on the outskirts of a big city like Bordeaux because there's a lot of economic activity close by, rather than, say, coming here to Creuse, where you need to find a way to get around. And yes, infrastructure and transport is another major challenge we face. We do have roads, we've got major roads, but we don't have a great rail network. It's really important to extend train lines to more rural areas because as part of the green transition, we're all meant to be using our cars less and less, and we really need more public transport. What we have now simply isn't enough.
Young people in particular are leaving rural communities. What can you do to keep them here?
If you're young and living somewhere rural, it's not unusual to want to leave and experience other things. One of the problems we have in Creuse is that people don't always consider what lies outside this region. We've tended to stay where we are without really knowing what's going on elsewhere. The department of Creuse isn't an island. If young people want to leave, that's great. But at the same time, we've been working to develop opportunities for higher education in this region too. We need to prevent a brain drain. Young people represent ideas and innovation. They can always leave and then come back. It's up to us to make sure that we're creating the right conditions for that. We need to make sure that if they do come back and live here, we're there to welcome them and help them succeed.
We've talked about young people. What does it look like to grow older here?
It might be easier to grow old here than in other places. We've the largest proportion of older people in any French department, and possibly of any region in Europe. In the early 2000s, we thought, why not harness that and develop something that would also help grow the local economy? That's when we decided to get interested in automation within the home, installing new technology in people's homes that allows older people to keep living there for as long as possible. That's about making sure they're safe, and also that they don't find themselves isolated. People who are isolated are so much more vulnerable, so we've worked hard to introduce this automation and these new technologies. What does an automated home look like? Well, we have a centre here in Guéret that works to come up with the most useful new technology solutions. It's about reinventing the housing of tomorrow, a home that evolves over the course of a life. As you get older, maybe you become ill, well, the house no longer meets your needs. I think our emphasis on making sure that people can maintain their independence might mean it's easier to grow older in Creuse than elsewhere. You're less isolated, and that's important.
In 2021, the city of Guéret pledged €10,000 to any family choosing to come and live in the city. Is that the answer?
It's part of the solution. That incentive was launched in conjunction with the state, but also with the wider district because the city centre of Guéret was struggling. At one point there was a lot of social housing, a lot of vacant properties in the heart of the city. We need to bring families back into the city centre so we can have people consuming again. It's also important for maintaining a vibrant economy. So yes, we think that this payment can be a real incentive to get families living here again. Young couples with children who can bring these neighbourhoods back to life, revive the local economy at the same time. That way, rather than having all of these suburbs filled with huge shopping centres, we can return economic activity to the heart of the city.
Eric Correa, thank you very much. France is the EU's agricultural powerhouse, and around 10% of all household income here in La Creuse comes from farming. But faced with volatile prices and stiff competition, farmers are struggling. In a bid to regain control, growing numbers are taking a gamble and going organic. Karina Chabot reports.
Fresh air and fresh grass for organic beef. Philippe Auvillain takes his herd outdoors every morning. He dropped pesticides years ago after his brother-in-law and associate died of cancer.
Joël had a brother who died of pesticide-induced cancer. At the time, people didn't talk about it, but his doctor said there was no doubt the pesticides caused it. That's when we decided to stop. We were harming ourselves and others. We couldn't go on.
The couple have 80 cows. They save costs by feeding them with hay and grains from their farm. Organic meat is also sold at 20% higher, but prices haven't budged in years.
The selling prices have been the same for some 30 years. Europe's common agricultural policy was put in place to back prices, but we would prefer to get less aid and sell our meat at its real value.
Philippe and Joël earn minimum wage, about 1,200 euros net. Going organic hasn't been simple.
Sometimes we had complex issues to resolve, especially in the beginning. And it's not easy getting answers or support when you live in such an isolated place.
All this will be over when the couple retires at the end of the year. Their daughter Elsa and her spouse Claude will take over the farm.
We don't know how many animals we'll keep. That's what we're examining.
We loved our work, but once you reach our age, you want to have less constraints.
If our children were not taking over the farm, we would have had to sell it to someone else. That would have been harder for us. The way things turned out makes everything easier.
For 5 years now, Elsa works with her parents, growing vegetables, which she sells at the farm and delivers to local restaurants and schools.
I've brought you some leeks. I deliver vegetables to 2 schools regularly and 2 other schools from time to time. Now the junior high school is also getting interested. I'm happy and proud.
Et je suis très très contente de ça. Très fière aussi.
6,15 €, s'il vous plaît.
Her partner Claude sells their vegetables at a market once a week. He still has another job which he plans to drop within a year so that he can focus on farming.
Well, that's it for this stop of our election road trip. It's now time to hit the road once again, and we're heading to the department of Gironde on the French west coast.